All right, everyone, welcome back to another round of FOIA Friday. Today we are going to be talking about public records and text messages. So how you can get your hands on text messages sent and received by public officials about public business. Judging by the response I've got to the guide that I put together earlier this week, and you all for showing up on this call, it's a topic people have been waiting for a while and asking me about. So I'm really excited to get into the weeds. We also have a special guest, Katy Golvala, who just took a big gulp of coffee, I think. But you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Katy Golvala. I am a health reporter at the Connecticut Mirror. We're a nonprofit newsroom based in Connecticut, and we report on state policy and politics. I previously worked first as a fellow and then as a reporter on the investigative desk, which was where I did the project on baby bonds that hopefully we'll be talking about a little bit today.
Yes, we absolutely will. And usually at this point, I pull up the meeting notes for today and tell you all what we're going to talk about and share some links. But instead today, I'm going to do two things, or I want to say two things. The first is that transparency is a team sport. So that guide that I published earlier this week, Katie Govala was one of several people who pitched in ideas either through email or just talking with me personally and help me put that together. These papers you see here are, oh, I don't know if you can actually see them, blocking myself, are the notes that I took on all the things that people sent me. And I just really appreciate all of you who contribute to the guides that we do in different ways or to this community podcast. It makes it all possible and a lot more fun for me to know that the questions that I'm asking are interesting to you all. And the second thing I want to say is more on that front, that transparency is a team sport, because right now Muckrock is in the middle of our summer fundraising effort. Our goal is to raise $5,000 by the end of the month. Right now we have 1,200, and I just want to tell you all that we would love if you stop by muckrock.com /donate and left us any donation, big or small, to help us meet that goal. It makes what we do possible in so many different ways. We don't have any sort of paywall or ads. All of this is information for the public good, hopefully shaped by the public and you all, and it really makes a difference for us. So muckrock.com /donate. It's also our 15th anniversary, and we hope to be around many more years. So consider dropping us a donation and being someone who powers our work. Um, I only make these donation calls maybe once or twice a year, so you won't hear from me on that front again for a little while. But now I want to dive straight into my conversation with Katy. Katy, the first question I have for you is tell us a little bit about the story. Where did the story come from? How did the project begin?
Yeah. So the story actually began with a canceled press conference. So there was supposed to be a press conference celebrating the passage and the soon-to-be enactment of the baby bonds program in Connecticut. And for those who aren't familiar with this idea of baby bonds, it's almost like state-provided savings. So in as opposed to universal basic income, it's like universal basic savings almost. So for every child, the law that passed in Connecticut, which was at the time the first statewide program ever passed. The law that passed in Connecticut invested $3,200 in an account on behalf of every child born to a mother on Medicaid. And the idea was that the state would invest this money and the child would get access to it when they turned 18 to do something like that would build their wealth, like buy a home, start a business, pay for college. So there was a set number of tasks you could use the money for. And that by the time they took it out at 18, it would be worth around $11,000. And that press conference I was gonna go to it because it was really on no one's beat, and at the time I was an investigative researcher. So Amanda was just like, "Hey, can you go see what this is?" And then it got canceled. So we were like, "That's weird." Um, and so we just started, myself and the children's reporter, Ginny Monk, just started making some calls. So the program had passed in 2020 or 2021, I believe. But at the time that it was passed, it was supposed to take effect July 2021. And then the state delayed the enactment by 2 years. And so made a bunch of calls. No one really wanted to talk on the record, but everyone was just like, "Oh yeah, I'm not sure. Don't know what happened with that." It was almost like they had forgotten about it. And then as we started talking to more people, they said that the delays were due to tension between the governor and the state treasurer at the time, Sean Wooden. And so then we just got super curious. And that's where it took off from. So eventually I went to an event in New York City at the Fed that was about baby bonds, where the treasurer spoke. And he said, "Yeah, we got this done in Connecticut, but it's the governor's fault that it hasn't come through yet." And my jaw just dropped. And then we put these requests in because publicly the governor was supporting the program. So we were like, what is the treasurer talking about that the governor is stalling? So we put in these requests, and lo and behold, we got back a bunch of emails and text messages that showed that behind the scenes, the governor's office and his administration were basically slow walking the process to implement the program because they weren't necessarily on board with it, even though it had been passed by the legislature.
And so your ears were just kind of perked up to conversations about baby bonds in general. Do you have
Hmm.
any idea that there were text messages or there were conversations happening over text and
No, we had no idea. We have a bit of a FOIA wizard in our newsroom that, if you haven't talked to already, he would be fun to talk to, Andy Brown. And he just always encouraged us to when we were writing. Yeah, I think he actually put together a FOIA template that we all use, and he's just like, ask for his policy is ask for everything. So the template he put together had like including emails, text messages, memos, voice recordings. It ran the gamut, and I think I would love to say we put together an incredible FOIA and we were masters of back and forth communication, and that's how we got all this information. But um, we can't prove this, but I do think one thing that really helped us out was we submitted these requests in late September, and in mid-October, the governor's office was instructed to take a FOIA compliance course because of non-compliance. So it's also very possible that they were feeling the pressure to
Mm.
really comply with this. Um, and so I think a lot of just things went right. We had someone in our newsroom who was really knowledgeable. The timing was fortuitous with the governor's office, and yeah, it really worked out.
So the request process was completely smooth. You filed this request off, they got back to you, said we're working on it, and they just started generating texts and emails, or how did that
Yeah,
work?
exactly. No, I'm just kidding. Never. Um, so they there was a lot of back and forth. I mean, the really mundane, it's like first we submitted the request to just the Division of Administrative Services in Connecticut, because they're the ones that, or the department rather, they're the ones that supposedly hold all the communication. We thought that we could just send everything in bulk to that. They took a week to tell us, no, you have to send it to each agency individually. So then instead of one request, that becomes six requests. Um, and then, they do end up sending us um the text messages and this and all of that end up coming from the governor's office. So different agencies end up sending us like things of varying interest, and we go through all that. And um, there was a lot of there were a lot of um uh parts where they had, blacked out certain content. And so there was a lot of back and forth that Andy really helped us with to, because in Connecticut, at least, they have to provide you with the statute that why this content is FOIA exempt. So we went back and we asked them for the statute of everything that was censored or blacked out. And there were some text messages that we were particularly interested in from the governor's wife to his chief of staff that were in part censored. So they had provided us with the statute for most, but not that one. They just said that's not of interest. So that got Andy Brown super angry, and he was like, "It's not a reason. It's not a reason to not submit something." So, there was a lot of that back and forth. And then I think just like logistically with the project, we had these, hundreds of pages of emails and text messages and stuff. And so we just went to work, Junie and I, creating a timeline. So anytime we saw something interesting, we put it in an Excel file with the date and what happened and what page it was. And then at the end, we like sorted everything by date. And that's how we basically came up with a timeline of what happened. So in some of those emails, you can see the the head of the Department of Social Services, which was one of the departments that was going to have to be involved in launching this program, saying, things are getting awkward. The treasurer keeps asking for meetings. We're trying to stall, but we don't know what to say anymore. Like, what's going on? And so the messages like that were really just like alarm bells. And then some of them were just funny, like the one you pointed out, like they're like sending memes to each other, making fun of the treasurer and how like, he's talking about how the new treasurer is talking about how he's gonna implement baby bonds and the governor's chief of staff and the comptroller oh, I forget her position at the time. I don't want to
I
misspeak,
think it
but
was what I think it was the comptroller. Yeah,
was the
now former
comptroller, yeah.
comptroller. Yeah.
Say, LOL at baby bonds, we'll fix that. So it was just like, FOIA is really a numbers game. And it's like sometimes you just get back a bunch of like calendar invites and scheduling emails, and other times you get back um just gold. And this was just one of those times it really worked out. So
Yeah. What did that feel like when you got them back and you started going through and you're like, wow, this is actually of substance. They're actually talking about things that are happening that I'm seeing happening and I can report on this.
it was great because when we were just talking to people, like at times you feel like you're crazy, because when you ask questions at the governor's office, they're saying, no, he supports it. Like, what are you talking about? It just hasn't gotten implemented yet. Um, and so it really just confirmed the stuff we were hearing on background. And after just so many, we probably made like 15 to 20 tried to get in touch with 15 to 20 legislators that we thought might have some insight into the process, and just no one wanted to talk on the record, which was so frustrating. So to first of all know that we thought we were onto something and we were right was great, and then to just have something that was so concretely on the record was yeah, it was awesome. And then, the fact that we got some some kind of petty content and some text messages and some like memes going back and forth just made it like even better. So, yeah.
Yeah. Was there anything that you had to just decide was not newsworthy and leave out in the memes and petty content
Oh,
category?
that is a really good question.
Or just how did
Um,
you make those decisions even as well?
yeah, we that's a good question. I can't remember specifically what it was, but I can remember something where we were sort of like, "Whoa, this is weird," and but it had nothing connecting to the story, so we didn't end up including it. I think in particular it was like strange that the governor's wife appeared in the text messages to the chief of staff, to the governor's chief of staff. She was actually saying like, "I think baby bonds is a great idea," and so some of the communications between I think that sent us down a strange path because we were like, at first we were like, wait, what's the governor's wife doing in here? Like, is this something weird? And then it just wasn't, they probably see each other at events all the time. And she was probably just like telling him that she thinks it's a good idea. And it wasn't that strange. But that almost sent us down a rabbit hole that, you know, I don't think really had much there. We were just like very curious as to why she was in there. But yeah, mostly we tried to just stick to also because there was so much that did have to go in there that did contribute to the timeline. So there wasn't much room to include anything superfluous anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this just makes me think to kind of take a step back to like the process of receiving the records.
Hmm.
Um, do you have any idea how they collected the texts when they handed them off? Like, were these officials like sorting them and like signing an affidavit and then submitting it back to their FOIA department? Did they already have like a agency-wide archiving system, or did that
That's
not come
that's a
through
really
as
good
informed?
question. We were in touch with their FOIA attorneys for each department, so I think they were the ones that were doing the collecting. What's
Mm.
interesting about the text messages, so they were collecting those from like government cell phones. Um, and so that was really interesting to see because I think sometimes you're like people are they like people who work for the government know that these things are foiable, right? Like they're so you're like, I'm not gonna ask for text because like what are they texting each other? They know. And like I think it's easy to remember, like, I mean, I certainly slip into this too. Like Slack is run by my company, and sometimes I use Slack pretty informally with my coworkers. Like it is a very human thing to slip in and out of that. So I think just like name of the game is like always ask for stuff because you never know what's gonna come back. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I do think it was like attorneys working for each agency, like collecting these.
Yeah, totally. That's something I touch on in the guide as well. Is like I think a
Mhm.
lot of people, whether you're in a public position or not, or you're even an investigative journalist who knows a lot about FOIA, you think of text messages and you're like, they're the most like private thing in the world, you know?
Mhm.
Like no one can read my text messages. Like I don't even read my text messages. But
Totally.
no, not necessarily if it's about public business.
Exactly.
So you got back text messages. Did you get back any of those like voice memos and other materials? That's an
No,
interesting
we
part of the report.
didn't. Yeah, we didn't. We got back some like PowerPoint presentations, but those weren't all that interesting. Um, yeah, it was really just texts and emails that we got back. And I think on that point, like, we always include that line, like emails, text messages, voice memos. I think it's always worth when you get the content back, if you're only seeing emails, just asking like, "Hey, I requested all this other type of information. I'm only seeing emails. Like, what's going on here?" Just to confirm, because we with the back and forth over like that one text, for example, that was blacked out that shouldn't have been. Like, you know, I'm not saying that the attorneys were trying to hide anything, but there are oftentimes when you end up doing that push back and forth, there are oftentimes things that come out of that should have been in your request in the first place that weren't included. So it's always worth. Um, I think before I did this project, I thought of like the art of FOIA as like sending out the FOIA, and that's like the easy part. Like that could take 15 minutes. The art of it is really the back and forth questioning. So if there's someone in your newsroom or, yeah, like the Slack channels where you can just say like, "Hey, I got this kind of weird response from the FOIA attorney. Like, what should I say back?" Like, I just am lucky enough to have someone with all that knowledge in his head sitting right behind me. So I think it's always, and he always has an answer for, what you should email back. So, find your buddy who knows about FOIA and just force them to help you write every single email. And it seems tedious and monotonous, but like that's how you get the good stuff.
Yeah. On that front, I will just add that Muckrock just received a really awesome grant from Press Forward to work with the Reporters Committee for the Free Press and the National Freedom of Information Coalition to put together some different tools that we imagine could be like having that person in your newsroom. We're going to really try to pool our CFP and the National Freedom of Information Coalition for all the different resources they have. So it doesn't end up like, maybe you don't have that person there that day or that person doesn't exist in your office and asking about exemptions or case law or things like that is just not something you can do. We have some pretty cool ideas for kind of like chat bot style conversations you could have, on that front. So yeah, and I totally agree. I think like one thing that I hit on in this podcast often is that um, you should challenge everything.
Hmm.
Law is adversarial. This FOIA process is adversarial. It's about how you're interpreting and how the courts have interpreted these statutes in your state. And so a lot of people think, like you said, like the thing about FOIA is just filing that request. And then if you end up in a bad position, you have to appeal. And I feel like I've tried even not to use the word appeal often because that immediately sounds more challenging to people. But
Hmm.
really, what they should be doing or thinking of is everything's a challenge, whether it's an appeal or a lawsuit or just a request to begin with. You're saying, I think the law looks this way and you should interpret it this way. So thus you have to give me this thing. And that continues, like you said, through every part of the process, whether it's a fee assessment or categorizing you as a journalist or
Hmm.
not, or the types of exemptions that they cite and the redactions that they give you. It's every part of the process.
Yeah. And if it feels miserable, you're probably doing it right.
I feel like we're working on some Muck Rock swag. Maybe we
Yeah.
put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. I just saw this note from BP. I think that's
Yeah.
a really good question. Like,
Huh?
how does a FOIA requester ever really know for sure what they get back from the public body is complete and truthful? Couldn't they be holding back responsive documents? And like, yeah, I like certainly. We just had a reporter in our newsroom put in a FOIA, got back some super thin response, and he was like, "How is it possible that these are the only emails with this keyword?" And then someone else, a legislator, forwarded him an email with the agency that he had FOIA'd that included that keyword that he did not get back in his request. So he went back to the agency and he said, "What's going on? Like, I know these other emails exist. Like, you need to either rerun my request or complete it fully." And so that is, yeah, that's just something that is always out there. And I think Brian answered it pretty well. Like we tried to FOIA a bunch of different agencies and departments for that purpose. You're almost like cross-referencing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I will say on this text messages front, this is something I can get to a little bit later, kind of more related to the guide. Like, there can be systems that agencies have where they're automatically archiving all their communications in different ways. Um,
Hmm.
but otherwise, when it's about text messages and they're stored on a personal device or a company device, they could be compelled to submit an affidavit saying they did the best search that they could, and you have
Hmm.
to rely on that affidavit. Or if you know that there's text that they're missing, challenge it, just like we were talking about. Um, Phil, you had your hand up first. You can go ahead and unmute if you want to ask a question.
Yes, thanks, and thanks for putting this on. Just I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned, Dylan. Maybe there's a case to be made for not filing formal appeals and simply just asking for what you otherwise would in an appeal and putting everything else that you would in an appeal, but not calling it that because that might slow it down. Did I hear that correctly?
I,
I'm
I think it definitely.
curious. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it definitely depends on the agency. I've found myself in both positions. Often I try to first get anything like that could eventually go into a formal appeal into the conversation, especially if you're in a state like I was in recently in Illinois that has certain parts of the statute that require the agency to confer with the requester, especially if it's about narrowing the request. So if you are in a state like that, I would definitely use that to your advantage rather than just like directly going to an appeal. But I think it never hurts to show that you've, throughout the process, made a good faith effort to navigate the process with the FOIA custodian or information officer. Because when you do build the document trail rate later on for a formal appeal, you can show that you've taken every step up to that point to work with them. And at the end of that, then it's a matter of how a judge or a mediation agency would decide on the interpretation of what they wouldn't give you or why they wouldn't give you it. Brian, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, so I heard you said you got other government officials involved. I've found that to be an absolutely fantastic tactic. Sometimes they have grudges with each other. Sometimes they want the info as well, having them lobby an email over saying, hey, like, answer this person. This is like super in the public's interest, signed elected official. You basically have your, public interest language already, locked and baked for an appeal when that happens. It's also very useful when you go to court because you can show bad faith. You can say, look, elected officials are basically saying this is a reasonable request. What's your problem? Give this person an answer. Judge looks at or from at least what I've heard talking to lawyers, the judges do not like that when you've appealed, orders have been filed, they default, and elected officials are telling you to do your job. It looks horrible in court.
Yeah, that's a great addition. Thanks for adding that. Katie, to kind of bring it back to your story, um, how was this received after speaking of what Brian was saying with other elected officials, seeing how others are responding to them? How was this received?
Yeah. Um, uh, we talked to a lot of elected officials who said that even though they, the ones who supported baby bonds obviously were not pleased to see what the governor was doing sort of behind the scenes, but even the legislators who didn't necessarily support it or just weren't super passionate about it were really angry to see how the governor was sort of wielding his own power to um informally overturn something that had been officially passed by the legislature. And actually um, a new treasurer took office the day we published. Um, and he told our editor, he was like, I knew I was gonna have to deal with baby bonds at some point, and I just didn't think it was gonna be day one of my job. But so he took office January 1st, 2023. The question that our story posed was the law was supposed to take effect in July 2023. Was it even going to take effect, given everything the governor was doing behind the scenes? And so then they did end up coming to an agreement. They decided to fund it a different way. If you read the story, the bonding was a big the bonding that was used to fund it was a big sore point. So they came up with a different way to fund it. And it got implemented. And so now the program is happening here in Connecticut. So it was just like the one of the coolest stories I've worked on because so few stories you get to see the impact of them, and this one we got to. So it was really fun.
Did anyone from the governor's office reach out afterwards to you, either critical of the story or with any extra comment now that you've officially had records contradicting what they had told you before?
No, we were working with them super closely. Like we met with them many, many times.
Mm,
We asked them about each specific record we were referencing in the story, so there would be no surprises. Um, so, because we were one thing that's a little scary is like you don't want to misinterpret something out of context.
right,
So we had
right.
gone through that process with them. So, um, it was there was it was very quiet afterwards, which was a nice change of pace from the few months leading up.
Yeah. Did they have a lot to refute once you had those records and you said, hey, look, actually, I know you told us all this, but now we have records that show that's just not true. And you were doing those kind of no surprises emails and calls.
Yeah, I
What were the
mean,
vibes?
the vibes were some of the most tense vibes I've had in interviews for sure.
Uh-huh.
The governor's chief of staff in particular was very combative and um, sort of, I guess, trying to suggest that, um, this is just how things go. And we were like, well, I don't think readers know that. I think maybe you all in government think that's just how things go, but I think a lot of people on the outside would be surprised to learn that. So, um, yeah, those were some pretty intense. They were good building up chops for my interviewing skills for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it published, you had that impact, things changed. Have you filed now more requests for text messages or communications since then after this pretty successful run at it?
I I have included it in every request that I have sent since then. None have been quite as interesting as these, but that doesn't mean something else won't come along. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, to round us out, do you have anything else you want to share about this story? Anything you want to plug? Any public records advice for our listeners
Mm,
after all this?
check out the Connecticut Mirror. We're doing we're doing some cool work, and we always like connecting with fellow nonprofits. So, reach out anytime. And yeah, I would just say like the the back and forth thing was really my takeaway from this project. The ongoing communication with the agencies to get the records that you want. I think I think sometimes they're just hoping we forget about stuff. And so honestly, sometimes just like sticking to it, reaching out constantly, being annoying, like that's what can get you what you're trying to get.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like, like we said, that getting that request out is FOIA 101, and then FOIA 201 is the, you know, kind of chess pieces you play back and forth as you respond
Hmm.
to their chess piece. You're like, oh, I'm getting that kind of response again. Well, I've dealt with this before. I know that, I can do this, or actually I have to ask to clarify to do this.
Exactly.
And that becomes the game.
Yep.
Awesome. I'm going to walk us through our guide just to get into the weeds a little bit, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. So,
Great.
just to bring us back to the guide, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. Oops. Um, So this is the guy that I mentioned that we published early in this week. Like I said, transparency is a team sport. Um, Katie is one of the people who contributed to this guide, as did Maggie Lee, Gregory Foster, Julie Lee, Christopher Ferry, Thomas Jones, Lauren Harper, David Collier, Elena Saxonhouse, and Fritz Mulhauser, as well as Krista Westerberg. So I really appreciate all the thought and advice that those people offered. If you're interested in kind of joining in the conversation outside of FOIA Friday, hop in our Slack channel, muckrock.com/Slack. That's where I ask questions like this. I also put them in different listservs or go to people I know who like to talk about these things. We like to talk about public records. I like to talk about public records. Um, but yeah, this guide and this conversation originally came from a question that was asked on a FOIA Friday about 3 or 4 months ago. And I hadn't had the time to dig into it, but I really didn't know a lot about text messages and public records before writing this guide. So I wrote this guide just kind of starting where I would want to start, which is um, one, do we know that texts are public records? And the answer to that I outline at the beginning of the article by just kind of thinking through a thought experiment of like, okay, so what makes a public record a public record? If it's a text, is it a public record because it is a text? The answer is no, it's a public record because of the content. And you see here, we have like a blank paper, we have a line paper, we have an iPhone. Regardless of what format it is in or where that information is stored, that's what makes it a public record. Or sorry, the content is what makes it a public record, not the format. So that's kind of how I start the article, just to make it clear that, like several states' laws say, and the Federal Public Records Act says, public records are public records regardless of physical form or characteristics. It's about the content, and not the format. Um, the format can get interesting. There was this funny example of one of a former muck rocker who filed a request for text messages and got back a photocopied phone. Hopefully, you don't get that back. You actually get the text messages in a format that you can easily analyze. Um, like Katie said, some of the easiest ways to request text messages is just to add it into your kind of all communications type of language that you're using to file a request for things like text messages. voicemails or voice memos as well. So in the guide, I give some just example language. Or I thought this was a pretty cool request from Ben Welsh, where he was just asking for a couple days of text messages. And that's pretty, I feel like, basic and easy, a little bit easier than asking for all messages or all communications over a larger time frame. Um, the part where this gets complicated that Katie and I were kind of touching on is where text messages are stored. Um, it really depends on two things, on both the policy and the practices of the agencies, from what I found. Um, as you can imagine, for emails, they're almost always in a work context stored on the employer's um, email server, wherever that may be, whether it's a Gmail server or something that they're actually running themselves. So it's kind of clear that whatever on that is on that server is being archived, or whatever is in that cloud is being archived, or whether it's a file they keep in their desk or a file they keep on a laptop. Um, there seems to be more practices around storing those types of documents. Text messages obviously are on phones, and that can be a personal cell phone or a company phone. And then there can kind of be the two options from there, which is the agency has a formal policy and way for archiving um, information on those phones, like text messages. And they're kind of doing that automatically. One of the companies that does that often I touch on in here is Smarsh. So you can kind of look at some of Smarsh's I think this is it. Their advertisements for how they work with public agencies to get an idea of like what they offer, and how public agencies might be using a vendor like Smarsh. But if they're not using a vendor like Smarsh, then they'll have to ensure somehow that the public official then does that search themselves, in good faith, and brings back to the FOIA department or the public information officer the text messages on their phones that are responsive to the request. And kind of like the question that BP asked earlier, that's where things get a little complicated, because you're relying on that public official to do their own search, and not to break the law or destroy messages or anything like that, before handing them over, and potentially signing some sort of affidavit that they did the search to the best of their ability. Um, that's why I thought this opinion on Washington, D.C.'s FOIA law was pretty useful. They kind of anticipate these challenges by making three recommendations. One, just they discourage employees from texting on their personal devices, because that's where it makes it more time consuming to then get those messages. Two, they require employees, or ask that public agencies require employees to use a personal device to separate messages about public business if they are doing that on their personal device. And then three, to submit the sworn statement, like an affidavit about the search. Um, so I think the kind of request language itself is pretty simple, but then the actual search and storage, unlike other documents or even other types of communications like emails, is where text messages can get tricky, because it's just not as simple as emails on an agency's email server. Lastly, I wanted to touch on disappearing messages. I think a lot of people on this call have probably seen the apps like Signal and WhatsApp that have functions that destroy messages after a short period of time. And there's been some pretty famous cases of public officials using those, like San Francisco's mayor's office, and former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. Um, I think pretty unequivocally those are bad. Like the search for text messages, like I was saying, is complicated. This is not complicated. That is, even if it is a self-destructing app destroying public records, um, outside of the retention schedule is breaking that public records law and deliberately undermines transparency. Um, so those are the key points that I think one should know when getting into filing some requests for public records. And I think that brings us back to Katie and any questions folks have for Katie or for me on this front about FOIA and text messages, or just FOIA, public records, investigative reporting in general. I'm catching up on some things in the chat. BP says, I would love a FOIA Friday session on tools to unredact. Um, cool. I will think about that because we do have Undocument Cloud, which is a tool that Muckrock makes, but specifically for journalists, an add-on that we call the Bad Redactions add-on that runs a couple different programs, I think, to scan documents for redactions that actually aren't redacting the underlying text. But other than that add-on, I'm not really so familiar with the different tools to check if the agency actually redacted the underlying text instead of putting just something superficial on top of the document. We have a question from Madison. General Q, how to suggest responding to excessive fees when they say it will take hundreds of hours of labor to search for key terms in electronic records or in electronic records. Katie, do you have any thoughts on
No, take it away.
that? Um, Yeah, Madison, I think kind of to the point that Katie and I were talking about challenging everything, when I get responses like that about excessive fees or get responses that say X amount of work is required, I would ask them to itemize it for you so that you can see what employees spending what amount of time and what the hourly rate is. Um, I'm trying to think of the kind of situations in which searching for key terms would bring up a lot of labor. If you do have a very general term, what's important to know kind of on the back end is that searching for keywords in emails as opposed to like requesting an actual specific document you know is in somewhere in someone's cabinet and it's like a smallish document or hundreds of pages. Emails, like you send tons and tons of emails a day, and if that search turns up tons and tons of emails, and the legal team at that agency has to spend a ton of time reviewing those for redactions, those hours can add up very quickly. So one thing that I always recommend for using key terms in searching for communications or emails or text messages is to try to find like the most specific words you can find in the smallest set of dates that you can think of, at least to start off, because the legal review time does add up. Hopefully that's helpful. Awesome. Lori, you raised your hand. I saw this message coming in the chat, but I'll let you, if you want to unmute, you can go ahead and unmute and ask as well.
Sure. Probably pretty basic to most people. First, shout out to Adrian and Dylan for their help. You guys are fantastic. So we put in a FOIA request on June 12th, and we got the response, of course, needed more time. And on July 30th, you guys sent a tickler, Muckrock did, and they responded with this response applies only to records that exist and are in the custody of the city, da 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 da. And I asked Adrian about it. He says it's just, funky language to say we only can give you what we have, which is fine. So first question is about reminders. How do you guys decide when to send your reminders, and how do I know that you sent a reminder? And the second question is, it turns out I learned that the procurement department might also have this information because it's being gathered by someone who got a contract. And was listening to you talk about asking everybody for everything and wondering if I should somehow duplicate that request and send it to procurement or write to the public records person of the department I'm communicating with now. How do I, if you think bringing procurement into the loop would be helpful, how do I do it? And the tickler
Um,
question. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions, Lori. It's always great to hear from you. Um, yeah, so for the reminders in the Muckrock system, I believe the way that they work, and I can double check for you, Lori, as well, with our technology staff, is the first reminders are to the state statute. So, like if you file a request and the state statute says they have to reply in 15 days, Muckrock will send a reminder to that state statute. After that, we have some AI that is processing the responses to the request and trying to find that date. Well, one is trying to categorize the request as like whether it's an acknowledgement, whether they're asking for you to fix something. So you'll sometimes see requests automatically labeled as fix required or payment required because they see that, or the AI sees that they monetary amount was mentioned in the reply. So those kind of categorizing and sorting things are happening to just be able to send you a notification quickly about what's in your request so you can get to it quicker rather than just seeing that there was a response. And in that process, what the program is looking for is if that agency says, thank you for your response. Here's, what we're working on. We ask for an extension of 30 days. If it sees an extension of 30 days, then it'll automatically send a reminder in that time period. And so I wouldn't necessarily rely on it if you know you want to really stay on top of that request. That you might have to just do yourself. You can also turn off auto follow-ups. Um, but it helps if you have several requests going and you may not be able to get to check back up on it. Muckrock auto follow-ups will do that for you. To your second question about sending that to the Office of Procurement, I absolutely think you should. And I think it's as simple as just copying the request that you have and then filing it to the Office of Procurement. Because if you do get documents from them and not from the other agency, then you can kind of pit the agencies against each other and say, hey, look, I already got this document from another public agency, and I know you have this piece or something like that.
So is it better to let the primary agency that got the request first know that you're going to do it to procurement or just do it, not tell them?
Yep, I think you can just do it and not tell them. You don't have to, as far as I know, and I've never seen anything like this in public records that you have to notify them. It's not duplicating work because that agency may hold similar but different files, as well. So it's not burdensome to either agency at all because you have, as far as I've seen, again, this is not legal advice. None of what I say here on this call is legal advice, but I don't think
No,
there's
no,
anything
no.
that you
Thank you very
will
much.
stop you. You're welcome. Thank you, as always. I'm going to scroll down. I think there's a couple more things in the chat. Trenton, Daniel, Trenton, thanks for joining the call again. Trenton says more of an observation than a question. It shouldn't be a surprise that more than a few government officials are using burner phones to text, and a requester language should note this. Um, BP says, Trenton, why would the government ever confirm burner phones exist? Both great, Trenton, great observation. Yeah, I think what we've seen is that the more types of messaging apps that offer these functions, the more public officials seem confused that they shouldn't use them, or should use them. And to BB's point about how would they confirm that burner phones exist, that's complicated as well. I think you could look back at the San Francisco case, or the San Francisco instance that I put in the guide. But I think the agency confirmed, the governor's or the mayor's office confirmed on the record that they had been using it for quite a while. And I'm not sure if that reporter had like an inkling of that first and then asked them about it and they confirmed, or how that happened. But like Trenton says, that they would be legally bound not to lie in that instance. Um, S. Shramsky, you can go ahead and unmute if you want to ask your question.
Hey, Dylan, it's Sam.
Right.
Thanks again for putting on a great FOIA Friday, and thanks to Katie. So I'm sort of in an ongoing situation. Basically, FOIA, the State Department and Southern Command, related to a marine radar installation in off the coast of Colombia that also involves the Coast Guard. But immediately got an unusual circumstances reply, and meaning that they'll take, in addition to the 20 days, an additional whatever it is, 10 statutory days to respond. And in the past, when I have FOIA'd federal agencies, it seems like there has been more appetite for discussion over the phone, about, the explanation for why the unusual circumstances were invoked and trying to move things down. But in the last two instances where I've tried to get somebody on the phone, I've been told that all communications have to happen over email, and that their federal government does no longer allows for FOIA conversations about the specifics of individual requests. So I don't know if you have any advice on that, and two, if this is something that you're seeing more of, or if anybody else is seeing more of.
That's interesting. I no, I have not heard that. Um, I have not heard that. I'm not sure where those directions come from. Though obviously lots of things are changing in FOIA departments across the across the federal government, including lots of different officers being laid off or departments shifting around in different ways. Um, yeah, if you have more information on that, send me that and I'll share that with some of my colleagues at Muckrock
Okay.
who might know more. I have a couple
Okay.
colleagues who kind of talk more with federal employees than I do, because that's interesting and that doesn't, as as recent as just like last year, the EPA, for example, had lots of long calls with me about different requests.
Yeah,
And
okay. Yeah, that's
they're
that's what I figured. Yeah, I
yeah,
figured too. I mean, like I've had, yeah, they're making it sound like it was almost illegal what I was trying to do, but I've had plenty of conversations with federal, PIOs and FOIA officers. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'll follow up.
yeah, follow up with me because I want to know more about this and I want to have the chance to ask some people who might know more than me about that.
Cool.
Especially if they're saying this is official policy in some way. Um, because I'm just not sure how that fits into federal law then. Um,
Yep.
yeah,
Okay.
great
Thanks.
question.
Yeah. Thanks.
Um, Nick asks, are you running into text being all considered pre-decisional or deliberative? Um, Good question. So for everyone else on the call who uh hasn't run into exemptions about deliberative conversations or deliberative information, that falls into a federal exemption and usually falls into different state exemptions, kind of in the sense of like uh drafts of things are exempted before they're finalized. Uh, I have not ran into that with text. I think that's a great question because of the informal nature of text. I think the other thing I'd add to that, I haven't run into this challenge, but I think in terms of challenges to think about with text messages, I think those texts being considered pre-decisional or deliberative is one thing to consider. And then I think the other thing to consider is the text in terms of retention schedules being being deemed what's the word I'm looking for? Transitory. And that could also be a problem because uh, there could be lots of texts that have not survived or were not archived in a proper way, and the agency says it's not a problem because most texts are of transitory nature, which means they're not treated the same way as other types of public records. I haven't run into those, so I can't, prepare anyone for how to deal with them, but I think it's worth considering if you are going to be filing text messages. filing requests for text messages to consider how you might move your chess pieces around those sorts of problems and what your state laws look like. Katie, you have any thoughts on that?
I have not run into that either, so.
All right. Well, we are basically at the end of the call, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up for us. Katie, thank you so much for joining. This was awesome. I really
Thanks so
appreciate.
much. It was fun.
Yeah, thank you all for hopping on this call and asking such good questions as always. I have buried the lead, but I want to also tell everyone I'm going to be taking a 6-month break from FOIA Friday, but that does not mean FOIA Friday is not going to continue. Someone else is going to take the lead. Her name is Cam Rodriguez. She's really awesome. You'll get to know her soon. She does not work at Muckrock, but she's a great FOIA nerd and reporter who will guide this conversation for the next couple months. So look forward to seeing you all when I get back in the new year. But otherwise, thank you all so much for the last 6 months or years of FOIA Friday. All right, see y'all.